This is the driver's side automatic axle. This is the driver's side manual axle. They are exactly the same all the way up to about this point. See, because this part starts here and that part starts up there. The biggest difference is right here. This is much longer, and I'll tell you why in 1 second. This is the manual passenger side axle. This is the automatic passenger side axle. Everything is the same up to right here. This has got a tripod section on the manual. The automatic has a round axle. I don't know if this is the way it's supposed to be or not, but the biggest difference, again, I've lined that up so to be where that's supposed to be, but the biggest difference is in length. Again, this side, the manual axle, is longer on this side, whereas the automatic axle is longer on that side. And that's to make up some of the length difference. And the reason being that your two differential seals, where your axles plug into on the transmission, is shifted over to the driver's side by about 2.5 to 3 inches. And that's going to make the length of the axles on each side different. When you are getting your parts, make sure that you get the correct axles. We're going to go ahead and install the axle seals and the axles right now. Alright, we are going to coat the axle seals, and this is supposed to be transmission oil. I don't actually have any right now, so I'm just going to drop it in motor oil. It's not that big of a deal. It's just for lubricating to get it inside. Get a big socket. This is an axle socket, and a mallet or a hammer. And you just want to put this socket on and hammer that into place. This would have been much easier to do with the transmission out of the car, obviously. Much better. Now we're almost flush, and you don't want it to be flush. I think the manual calls for it to be 1/8 of a millimeter outside, so you don't want it to be flush. Actually peeking out just a hair is just perfect. What do you think? Looks pretty good? Looks good to me. Okay, well, I ended up taking the axle out, bending the C-clip, which is damn near impossible to bend. The thing is really hard. You got to use all the strength in your hands to bend that clip, and it'll only bend a little bit. And then you put the clip back on, then that should give you enough room to put that back in. So what I'm doing, what seems to be successful, I've almost got it all the way in now, is you don't really have to push. You have to wiggle this tripod part down here. Wiggle it up and down and around. And you really don't have to push in that much. You just have to be able to wiggle it in. Because it's such a tight clearance, slamming on it isn't going to do anything. You just got to keep on wiggling. Once you get it in that track, I think I'm all the way in. Yeah, look at that. because I wanted to store the car with the tires overnight, I put these 2 bolts back in. So now I'm just going to take this one out. This will allow the hub to pivot up and out, and that should give me enough room to slide that in. I think it was Engine Tau FSD. If you leave your lower control arm connected and your tie rod connected, there's no way to actually pivot this out, so it's going to be a pain in the ass. But when you do it this way, you're going to have to go for a full realignment, and that sucks. Okay, now we got this bolt out. We can start to pivot this lower control arm out. You see, this whole thing will pivot up and out now, so we can, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this with one hand. I want to hold this thing with my mouth. I'll just put you on my lap like so. Let's see if this works. Now you got your hub in there. All you got to do is line up your splines. And it looks like the same thing on this side. I'm going to have to wiggle quite a lot up and down. Just keep on wiggling. Here's how the back seat looks. This silver ring right there has to meet up flush. So just keep wiggling until that meets up flush. Well, I just slipped right out. There we go. Come on. Wow, that's right on there, huh? You can get a real good look at how this works from underneath. This is where the pivot joint goes in. You can loosen this, and it kind of acts like a battery terminal. If you're familiar with how you get a screwdriver in here and pry open the battery terminal to get your battery terminal in, same exact concept, except a little bit heavier duty. Here's your nut there, so once you tie that down, it crimps around that joint, and that's how that works. So now we're going to put this onto your joint. This whole lower control arm is on a spring, and right now it's currently down in its farthest position down. So if I were to take this hub and pull off, this thing would spring back up, because then I might end up, you want to be real careful with your boots. You don't want to tear those rubber boots. And I basically have brand new ones on there, so. Normally there would be a nice rubber boot here, but of course I have completely destroyed my boot. And that is going to affect how well your pivot joint is lubricated. Yeah, I did put a lot on there, but you know, I'm also trying to apply with a towel, which is going to wipe some off. Alright, I've got that pivot joint completely packed with grease. Now, normally this is a one-piece boot, but you can see it's split right down the middle. So I can just kind of use that as a cap in the meantime. And it just squish it down on there. That's all I'm going to do for now, because I just want to get the axles on. We're going to push down the lower control arm as far as we possibly can, and slide that joint right on top. Like everything, I learned the hard way. All you have to do is take out the screw from the bottom there. That's it. And it just fell right in place. I was probably struggling with that for about 15 minutes. Push up in it. Oh, that works. Come on, keep going. Alright, that's through. And now you wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. That's tough with one hand. I don't know how well you can see that, but this thing is all torn up from when the person removed it from the half shaft. This is from the intermediate shaft. He took a pry bar and wedged it and just crumpled this thing. So I've been taking a piece of sandpaper, sanding it down, got the top surface nice and flat, and then go in on the edge, round it off. That takes a lot. That took off a lot of the jagged edges, but there's still some. As long as the inside lip is nice and smooth. Thankfully he didn't damage the inside lip, because the inside lip is what contacts the rubber seal. The outside doesn't contact anything really. So that's not a big deal. So we're going to reinstall this. This automatic axle does not come with that same differential cap. It's just a seal. So it's not a big deal. And the Mazda parts department couldn't find that seal either. See how far above that edge it sticks out? Not much, just enough to prevent it from going in. So that's when you might need to take the C-clip off. Definitely gonna have to take off the C-clip because it's being a pain in my ass. Well, here's a good example of that clip that I was talking about. See how far out that is? Now the easiest way is to wiggle it back and forth and try and walk it on there. Might be easier with some assembly lube.
I'm going to talk so much that you're not going to possibly be able to edit me out.
All you have to do is put that tripod mount back on. But that's holding the weight sufficiently as it is. So I had time to find these bolts because I had the wrong bolts there. And then that's just going over and resting on the lower control arm for now. Ran into a problem here because this axle design is different. This is the tripod. I had the circular one on my automatic. This tripod design does not allow a long bolt there. The bolt is probably about that long. Normally you would put it in through the top, but there's just no room. This explains why they had to remove the intermediate shaft, because this one bolt on the transmission that these came out of could not be unmounted unless this was pried apart. So I don't fault the guy at all for doing that, because now I can see he had to do that. There's no way around it. So that really sucks for manual owners. I bet that you could switch this out with a round one. Actually, maybe I might have that in my future. I might end up having to do that. Hopefully that'll fit into here. Because that's just a pain in the ass. With the automatic, I just unbolted these 3 bolts and pulled the entire thing out. It was so simple. This is just a pain in the ass. It's another major headache that you got to deal with. So that's why I am recording the reinstallation stuff, because you're just going to run into little things like this that are different, and it sucks. But that went right in, and the whole thing that I was talking about with the cap on the automatic, you can see right here that this is actually a cap that fits around the seal. So this cap is included on the manual axle. You got this little surrounding cap. That is not there on the automatic axle. So that's another difference. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put those 2 bolts in. I'm not even going to mess with that 3rd one. Screw it. I'm sure it's going to be fine without it. It's not a big deal. You can't put in a shorter bolt. You can't cheat. You can't cheat and put in a shorter bolt. There's no way around this stupid tripod. You have to remove the intermediate shaft, and I just put the damn thing together. It took me forever to put it together. I'm not messing with that anymore. I'm just installing it and saying screw it. That's it. Alright, now that we have the axle hanging here, we're going to take off our axle nut, and then try this out. We're going to need to loosen this lower bolt so that we can pivot lower hub bolt. Now we can pivot and should have enough room to put this in. So now that's in there, and you can see as I'm turning the entire thing that it's already in a spline. So now we just have to manipulate it in. Next would be to clean up this lower ball joint, pack it full of grease, just like the other side, and then reinstall this lower pivot to the hub. As you can see, that lower pivot is really rusted. So what I'm going to use to clean that up is a brass bristle brush, and then a whole bunch of packing grease on top of that, as well as inside of the dust boot. Probably be a smart idea to put your axle nut on some of the way. See that little nub there? That's what you should be looking for when this pops out. If you don't see this raise up above here, it means your pivot joint, your pivot ball is not locked into place. And I don't know, that might be dangerous, but you want that sticking above before you thread that through. Alright, the next step would be to center your steering wheel. Turn it left, turn it right, make sure it's right in the middle there. When you do that, the tie rods on both sides should line up with your hubs. Alright, then you take the castle nut off of the tie rod end. You're still going to have a cotter pin there. Hopefully you save that and it's in good shape. Don't forget your washer. You're going to need a washer for that too. Well, at least I am in my case. I need a washer here. I don't remember if there wasn't one there, but there's too much play here, so I'm going to shim it up with a washer. That should go right down in there. So you might have to put your castle nut back on, tighten that down, and then stick your cotter pin through. Pretty much put together. Hopefully it's straight. Make sure that the steering wheel is pretty much as straight as we want it. And you come out here and take a look at your hubs and see if they're straight. That looks pretty good. Now I'm just eyeing it. This is not a professional alignment or anything like that. That one looks pretty good too. So we got our tie rods on, and now we just have to put the rotors on and then the caliper. I cleaned off the rotor with carb cleaner or brake cleaner, either one, really. Both sides. As you can see, the side's pretty pitted, but it's going back on anyway. It just goes on like so. Alright, next is to install your caliper to hub bolts. And there's two. There's one here, and there's one down over there. And they are two different grade bolts. One's a 10, one's an 8. And I'm going to go for the 8 up here and the 10 on the bottom. Since there's only two, I got a 50-50 shot of getting those backwards. And knowing me, I'm going to get them backwards. So if somebody knows which one goes where, let me know. If you find yourself in this predicament where your caliper will not come down because your brake has been depressed in the car, and you have no, and your brakes, the calipers are squeezed together. And that's with by this silver ring here. It pushes outward towards you. If you find that that has been the case and you cannot get this on because you're doing a swap and you have no electronics or anything, what you can do is get a C-clamp, a big C-clamp, put it through here and run your clamp down to the very back inside there. Okay, we have our C-clamp tightened down inside of there, and there's a nut that the clamp is sitting on right here. So we are going to now run this through. Always one-handed. And this is going to push that caliper piston back into place. Now we have our clamp out, and now that shuts. There is plenty of clearance. Ta-da! Now we're good to put our wheels back on. It's January, dude. Jesus Christ. Here's how I tighten down my axle hub nut. You get your 32mm socket. You put that on there. And you tighten clockwise with the breaker bar there, and you got to tighten as hard as you can possibly get it, to the point where you think you're going to end up breaking this. It's real tough because you've got to remember that they put these on with 400+ pound impact wrenches. Try and line the notch back up to where it was. That's your best gauge of where it should be, and then take a chisel and you re-notch that mark there. That's how it's supposed to be. In the factory manual it says that's what you're supposed to do. When you are ready to put your wheels back on, you might notice that your rotors are loose. There's a lot of play in your rotors, even though your bracket and your caliper are on there correctly. As you can see, there's quite a lot of rust on here. So when you spin this, make sure that you push your rotor on firmly as you spin. You can hear that noise, that grinding noise. So you want to check and make sure that your dust shield is not contacting the rotor anywhere. I actually had this part down here contacting the rotor, and this is really easy to bend. You just bend that right back out into place. And don't worry too much about that noise, because that's just going to be the rust, and as soon as you use the brakes the first couple times, that rust is going to spin right off, and you should be good. And then you can use this little hole here, which is an inspection cover, so you can look inside of there and you can see how worn your brake pads are. Mine are fairly new, so there's not going to be a lot of play in there. And even though that noise might concern you a little bit, it's good, and we're ready to put the wheel back on. I find it easiest if you put your top stud straight up, and then align that straight up. Now that we have all the wheels tightened down, go ahead and spin the tire. Barely any noise. And then just do the other side and we're ready to drop the car. Again, wheel lock, 21mm, 19mm. on terra firma.